Ultimately, reflection into itself is the dialectical soul of all activity.
Es sind also an der Reflexionsbestimmung zwei Seiten, die zunächst sich unterscheiden. Erstlich ist sie das Gesetztsein, die Negation als solche. Zweitens ist sie die Reflexion in sich. Nach dem Gesetztsein ist sie die Negation als Negation. Dies ist somit bereits ihre Einheit mit sich selbst. Aber sie ist dies nur erst an sich. Oder sie ist das Unmittelbare als sich an ihm aufhebend, als das andere seiner selbst. Insofern ist die Reflexion in sich bleibendes Bestimmen. Das Wesen geht darin nicht außer sich. Die Unterschiede sind schlechthin gesetzt, in das Wesen zurückgenommen. Aber nach der anderen Seite sind sie nicht Gesetzte, sondern in sich selbst reflektiert. Die Negation als Negation ist in Gleichheit mit ihr selbst, nicht in ihr anderes, nicht in ihr Nichtsein reflektiert. In this passage, which marks the transition from the Wesen as such to the determinations of reflection, identity, distinction, opposition, Hegel isolates two moments that every Reflexionsbestimmung as such carries within itself, even before these moments unfold into the concrete forms that will shape the rest of the chapter. The first moment is the Gesetztsein, the state being. Considered from this aspect, the determination of reflection is Negation als solche. It is not an immediate, independent being, but something that exists only as a determination of the reflecting movement of the being itself, and thereby only as a negation of immediacy. Now, because it is negation as negation, a negating that negates itself in distinction from a simple negation of something else, it already implies a unity with itself. Negation of negation is structurally a return to itself. But Hegel emphatically stresses that this unity here exists merely an sich, merely implicitly. It has not yet been established as such, not yet für sich. The determination is on this point, das Unmittelbare als sich an ihm aufhebend, als das andere seiner selbst. The immediate, grasped in the act of its own cessation, becoming its own other, without this becoming other itself, already being explicitly understood as its own acquired self-relation. Under this aspect, the reflection is in sich bleibendes Bestimmen. The determining activity of the being does not emerge outward, in a real independent otherness. The distinctions it produces are simply established and immediately withdrawn back into the being. They have no resistance, no existence of their own. They are transparent to the movement that produced them. The second moment is the reflection in sich in the proper sense. And here that same content is provided with the opposite emphasis. The determinations are now said to be not set, but reflected in themselves, not merely stated, but reflected in themselves. The negation as negation stands here in equality with itself, instead of being reflected in its other or in its non-being. In other words, the same negativity which under the first aspect was nothing other than a vanishing dependent state, is here conceived as having returned so completely into itself that it has assumed the form of self-equality, of a fixed, self-identical essence. Viewed from this side, it appears to be something fixed and independent, although in truth it is nothing other than mediation that has erased the semblance of its own mediated being. The philosophical stakes of this distinction are significant and deserve explicit attention, because they govern the entire further unfolding of the chapter. For Hegel, every Reflexionsbestimmung is simultaneously a fleeting state and independent self-equality, and the dialectical instability of categories such as identity, which appears immediately self-identical, but is in reality permeated by mediated negation, springs precisely from the fact that these two sides, Gesetztsein and reflection in sich, belong to one and the same determination, without this togetherness having already been acknowledged as such. The two sides are thus not two different determinations, but one determination, viewed first from the standpoint of its becoming, as a state, as a negation arising from the movement of the being, and subsequently from the standpoint of its result, as returned within itself and thereby having acquired the deceptive appearance of immediacy. The rest of the chapter is, in essence, nothing other than an elaboration of the question of why this semblance of immediacy, the reflection in itself, conceived as if it were simply sign, is itself a shine that must constantly unmask the essence as mediated.
Das Wahre ist das Ganze. Das Wahre ist das Ganze.
Section 1. The Mirror of Thought. The Physical Origins of Logic. So in Hegel's philosophy, the concept of reflection into itself, or Reflexion in sich in German, comes directly from the Latin word reflexio, which literally means to bend back. Think of it as a movement. It's the process where something relates to itself by returning from its otherness, effectively bending back into its own internal unity. And Hegel didn't just pick this word at random. He was drawing a direct analogy to the science of optics. As he wrote, "This word reflection is originally applied when a ray of light in a straight line impinging upon a surface of a mirror is thrown back from it." So, just like a ray of light bouncing off a mirror, reflection in our thought involves leaving the immediate surface of things, hitting a limit, and then bouncing back inward to find an underlying essential truth. This sets up a really foundational contrast in Hegel's logic. On one side, we have being. Being is just immediate presence. It's whatever exists right there on the surface. But on the other side, we have essence. Essence is being that is actually withdrawn into itself. It has gone through that bending back process. It's no longer just superficial, it's characterized by reflection. So how does this bending back actually play out? Section 2. 3 phases of reflection. The logical process. In the science of logic, Hegel breaks down reflection as a process with 3 distinct moments: positing reflection, external reflection, and determining reflection. Let's walk through them. Step 1 is positing reflection. Hegel calls this an absolute movement from nothing to nothing. Basically, the underlying truth, the essence, produces its own surface-level appearance, almost like a magic trick. Hegel calls this show or shine. It's a self-related negativity that essentially creates or posits its own otherness as just a piece of itself. Step 2 is external reflection. Honestly, this is where most of us live our day-to-day lives. It represents the standpoint of standard human understanding. Here, you, the observer, find an immediate object sitting totally outside of you to reflect on. But Hegel critiques this. He says this is a completely one-sided view because it misses the internal, necessary link between the observer and the observed. And that brings us to the ultimate unity, determination, reflection. The observer and the observed aren't alienated from each other anymore. The subject's reflection actually mirrors the object's own internal reflection. Determinations like identity and difference are finally recognized for what they are, essential features of the thing's true nature, deeply connected to the mind that's observing them. Section 3. The conscious ego, the highest instantiation. Let's zoom out from all that abstract logical machinery and talk psychology, because the absolute highest instantiation of this is the I. I absolutely love this quote from our sources. The I is as it were the crucible and fire through which the loose plurality of sense is consumed and reduced to unity. Think about that for a second. Your ego isn't a static thing. It is a fiery, active crucible that takes the chaotic, loose plurality of your sensory world and melts it down into one unified conscious experience. Through intra-reflection, the soul literally liberates itself from mere biological existence. So the real key is how this ego awakens. Through this inward bending, the ego overcomes the opposition of consciousness. It starts to recognize itself in the objects it encounters, realizing the world is actually a product of its own activity. This directly anticipates Fichte's famous formula of self-consciousness, I equals I. And fascinatingly, modern scholarship shows how this 19th century concept perfectly predicts Freudian psychoanalysis, that constant, relentless process of the unconscious projecting its internal state outward and then introjecting it back in to form the conscious ego. Section 4. Substance becomes subject. Ontological significance. Now that we've mapped out the logic and the psychology, let's look at the grand ontological significance here. Hegel famously argued that reality has to be understood not just as substance, but equally as subject. Substance is how things appear, as stable, independent, abstract chunks of matter. But subject is what things actually are. dynamic, self-mediating totalities. Reality isn't a static rock. It's an active tornado, a dynamic process that is constantly mediating itself. This means the actual truth of being is reflection. To really know something as reflected into itself is to see it as a mediated totality. It didn't just pop into existence as a simple abstract unity. It went through a deep, necessary process of separating from itself and returning to itself. This applies to the entire universe, and it applies directly to your own experience of reality. Section 5. The dialectical soul, the realm of human freedom. Let's bring everything together. How does the practical will actually find freedom? Well, by using this exact reflective structure. True freedom isn't about being randomly tossed around by nature. It's about abstracting yourself from all external determinations. It's about finding freedom in your own self-activity. You pass through otherness, you differentiate reality, but only so you can return to a higher, much more concrete unity with yourself.